I have 5 o'clock, so I'm going to ask all of you, if you're not speaking, to please mute yourselves so that we don't get feedback. And I want to welcome you to our first all call for this Rotary year. You may remember that we started these calls last year. It's an opportunity for your directors and now your trustee to share with you information about decisions that were taken at board meetings, not all the decisions, but the ones that we think have an impact on the work that you're doing in your districts and in your clubs. So Director Peter and I have had 3 board of director meetings since June. So we're going to talk about some decisions that came out of those meetings. And Trustee Barry, past Rotary International President and current Trustee Barry Rassin, is going to share with you some decisions from the trustee meeting that impact the work that you're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and talk about what happened in our June board meeting. So this would have been the last meeting of last year's board of directors. So at that meeting, you may remember when we last talked to you, we talked about the fact that the board of directors created in April a pandemic response task force. And we asked that task force to share a report at every board meeting. So in June, they did that. And there were some points that came out from that task force that relate to what you're doing. First of all, the board encouraged governors to take a look at the district reports that are available on Rotary's Learning Center. These are reports that relate to the pandemic response. The board also is encouraging governors to conduct a portion of your club visits virtually. They don't specify, we didn't specify what portion, we just said a portion. We also asked the General Secretary to conduct an evaluation of at least 50 districts to talk about the experience that they've had with virtual club visits. We also asked the General Secretary to make sure that on My Rotary website, we have resources for you about how to run and how to participate in an engaging virtual meeting. Oh my gosh, can I tell you stories about some of the things that I have seen at virtual Zoom meetings? But that's another call for another time. But anyway, on our website, you can find that information about how to have an engaging virtual meeting. And finally, we amended the policy that has to do with licensing. So clubs and districts that are interested in event-specific fundraising with the sale of alcohol, there has been a change in the policy. I won't go through that whole decision, but if you are one of the districts that holds events and you have a special project that involves the fundraising sale of alcohol, please, I'm going to put my email in the chat box. If you want to converse with me, share your question with me through email, and I will talk to you more about what that code of policy now says. Okay, Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about programs and awards.
Great. Well, thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon. Good evening, everybody. Great to see, I think, 46 people on the call, many familiar faces. So the most exciting news under the heading of programs and awards was, as you well know, the board unanimous decision to support the 7th area of focus, the environment. And this followed the unanimous decision of the trustees. Yes, I think we should take a moment to applaud the directors and the trustees for their wisdom. So just a few points about that decision. I mentioned that it was unanimous. Rotary has in fact for long supported the environment with approximately $18 million in global grants over the last 5 years through our existing areas of focus. Over the next few months, the boards of the RI board and the trustees will consult with Rotarian staff and industry experts to determine eligible activities for global grant funding, and we'll be providing more information on the grant program in October. Grant applications will be accepted as of the 1st of July next year. In the meantime, gifts and commitments from Rotarians and others will continue to be support to provide global grant support for the new area of focus. So that was the big news, and I think that's going to be very well received throughout the Rotary world, particularly amongst the Rotaractors. The two areas, when we did our surveys of Rotaractors, the two areas that they both wanted to support were environment and human rights. So please stay tuned for some exciting developments in the area of environment. One other important item that was discussed in the last meeting related to Rotary Youth Exchange. We had two options. We were asked to consider essentially closing down the Rotary Youth Exchange for this year, or taking a less severe approach. And the board decided on the second approach. So Rotary will be encouraging districts to arrange, as soon as it is determined possible and safe, for the return of students currently on exchange in countries that are or may become impacted by the pandemic. We'll also be encouraging districts to voluntarily suspend long-term exchanges in 2021. However, beginning on October the 1st of this year, districts may begin short-term exchanges. And with effect from the 1st of January, districts may begin long-term exchanges, provided they adhere to a list of safety measures which Rotary has provided and which we can make available for those who need them. And the other item under this heading was to encourage districts to keep those youth who would have otherwise participated in Rotary Youth Exchange engaged through online-only exchanges or other Rotary youth programs. And finally, under this heading, the board approved a Polio Plus communication plan, spending plan for 21-23, totaling US $2 million. That's a significant contribution, and it reflects the importance that communicating the polio eradication initiative has, and the need to resolve this issue as soon as we can. So that's all under programs and awards, and I guess I go back to Stephanie for other developments under the heading of meetings.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So this is one that we've all been wondering, like, what in the heck are we supposed to do about meetings and our gets and our pets and our trainings and what happens? So when we met in June, the board acknowledged that we had made a prior decision that no in-person meeting or event should be mandatory for any Rotarian who feels uncomfortable attending because of the pandemic. But even with saying that, we confirm that governors-elect and club president-elects are required to attend training either at an in-person or a virtual gets or pets, or at some kind of makeup training. And we also confirmed that governors nominee are encouraged to attend respective training. However, if that training is only provided in person and the participant is uncomfortable attending, the board encouraged participants in those cases to look for alternative methods for receiving their training. So that means reach out to the leaders in charge and say, I'm not comfortable going, I need to have some sort of alternative for makeup. We also agreed that organizers of gets and pets and other training meetings are responsible for providing makeup trainings virtually for anybody who's uncomfortable attending in person. And finally, we agreed that a decision about the 2021 International Assembly, whether or not it's going to be held in person in Orlando, or if it's going to be virtual, is going to be taken at our October meeting. Okay, Peter, you want to talk about administration and finance?
Right, thanks again, Stephanie. Well, several items that I think are worthy of note. The board is continuing its work with the Shaping Rotary's Future Committee. This is the committee that's looking at a new structural model for Rotary. We're still some way off. Forgive me, let that phone ring. Do we find people on this call for telephone distractions, Stephanie? If so, I'm happy to make a contribution to Polio Plus.
Only directors.
Okay. So we'll be hearing more about Shaping Rotary's Future Committee. There's nothing in particular to report. It's an ongoing issue, and it will continue, I think, for several years to come. We did take one really significant decision to rename the Rotary International magazine from The Rotarian to Rotary. I don't know whether that took an hour and a half, Stephanie, or was that a 5-minute decision?
Maybe 10 minutes.
All right. But the two other significant decisions, you'll recall that Rotary Foundation made $3 million available as part of the Disaster Response Fund to fund COVID-19 projects. That fund was very quickly depleted. And as at the cutoff date for receiving new applications, there were 107 projects that had 107 applications that could not be funded. So the board decided that it was appropriate to fund those applications, and it agreed to transfer from reserves enough money to fund those 107 outstanding applications. And then finally, the board reaffirmed its commitment to Rotary's diversity, equity, and inclusion policy, and agreed to schedule a special board meeting in July to establish an ongoing action plan to implement that policy. And I think that is the next item on the agenda, and I'll pass it back to Stephanie.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, indeed. There were 2 board meetings in July. The first one was just a 1-day meeting, and basically, the decisions taken were a lot of administrative things that had to do with the board. When we have our meetings, approvals of institutes. So the real important matter that I think for you happened at the special DEI board meeting that happened on July 22nd. At that board meeting, the board took a decision that agreed to establish a 7 to 9 member task force comprising regionally diverse members who have professional expertise in diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of which will be a Rotaractor, and 2 will be members of the board of directors. And they will be appointed by the president, and their charge is to draft an ongoing DEI action plan, because you know right now what Rotary has is a statement but does not have an action plan. So this task force is going to move that statement forward. What I think is most significant about what this task force is going to do, well, a couple of things, but one that you'll find I think very useful is that it's going to be creating a cadre of champions, people internationally who have experience in DEI, who can be available to you for your districts and your clubs, especially those districts and clubs that are moving forward and are anxious to make a statement about social justice. So the invitations for that task force have gone out. That group is going to gather quickly and start to move quickly. You know, we were talking earlier before we started about, you know, how technology has changed how we meet. Well, one of the good things is that it allows us to do things more quickly. You know, last year we were able to tell you ahead of time, hey, we're going to have 4 all calls because the board of directors meets 4 times a year. And then right after the meeting, we'll meet with you. Well, you know what? Fasten your seatbelts because the board of directors are meeting a lot more because we have issues, we have information, we have things that have to be taken care of. So our next meeting will be in September. Then we have an October meeting. Then we have one in November. So this board is more flexible in terms of its ability to get together and take decisions that are going to move the organization forward. And this is certainly one of them. So I know that I've heard from many of you already that you have clubs and you have others in your communities who are interested in moving forward with DEI, and I would encourage you to encourage them to do that. But you know, Rotary will have information and will have things that you can rely on to share with those individuals. But I wouldn't wait. I mean, if you're, you know, your Rotarians know your communities better than anybody does, and they know what needs to be done now. So I encourage you to do things now, but watch for RI because there will be some guidance. RI is not going to tell you exactly what to do. We can't. You're independent clubs, independent districts, but we can be available to support your efforts and to provide that kind of guidance and suggestions and resources. So that's what the July 22nd board meeting was about moving us forward in our diversity, equity, and inclusion program. I will also tell you that as part of that meeting, the board of directors underwent a training. We had an international expert who talked with us about DEI, and at the very minimum, what he was able to do was provide some common language. Remember, the board of directors is international. So he talked with people about the difference between equity and equality. And so at the end of the meeting, all of the board of directors at least had a common base of understanding of what DEI was about. So I'm hopeful that the trustees will also take that action and do some training. Then we'll look at training our staff, and then we'll also look at trainings that will be provided for Rotarians in clubs and districts. All right, so that was the July 22nd meeting. Now, it is such a pleasure to introduce our past Rotary International president, our own Barry Raston, who is currently a trustee. And this is the first time on our all calls that we've had both directors and a trustee. So Barry, I'm so excited to turn this over to you so that you can share with us information about decisions from the Board of Trustees.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate being here. It's so good to be with you all. And jump right into the reason I'm here. The trustees have been talking for a couple of years now about somehow pairing a trustee with the director. It's not as easy as it sounds because there's 17 directors and 15 trustees. The 17 directors come from paired zones around the world. The 15 directors come from wherever, more of a geographical decision than a finite decision based on zones. But we have, and we've spent the time putting these pairings together. Our zones are really easy. As long as we have a zone, a trustee within those 2 zones, then it's easy. I'm in the zone, so I'm paired with Peter and Stephanie, works like a charm. Some of the other US ones are paired like that. Some of the European ones, on the other hand, a trustee is going to have to work with 2, even 3 directors in order to make it work geographically and well. But the beauty is we could really work as a team and focus. The directors are responsible for the zones and the trustee is a resource. And so we need to be working together, and whatever the zones need from the trustees, I'm here to assist. And of course, you already have your RRFCs and DRFCs and everybody, LEMGAs and everybody else who's got an acronym is already there. But now we have the whole team together, which I think is a brilliant decision that we finally came to. Keep in mind, every July 1st, we're gonna have to change the pairings because as the trustees change 3 or 4 every year, and the directors, half of them change every year. But the zones for the directors don't change. So that's pretty standard, but the directors can come from totally different geographic areas. So this will continue, and I think it's really good to enhance the team that we're doing. A long discussion we had was on global grants. I think probably any of you who have been working with global grants are very aware that there's been a lot of pressure on the World Fund this year. COVID-19, immediately we started getting a lot of requests, and the trustees said, let's use the disaster fund, and they put $1 million of World Fund into the disaster fund, and within 5 days, they'd already provided grants to 43 applications around the world. So they put another 2 million in and asked districts to contribute. And a lot of districts did. So we raised $2 million in donations from districts and clubs. And so we were able to do $5.3 million just for COVID-19 projects out of the disaster fund specifically. On top of that, we also did about $17 million of global grants just for COVID-19 projects. So really jumped in it quickly. And I got to tell you, I don't remember the foundation being able to move that fast with that many grants around the world. I'm really impressed, and I think the staff did a miraculous job. So my question to the trustees was, if we can do that for this, we need to look at our processes and see why we can't do this all the time. So we're going to look at the processes and see how we speed up the whole process. Meantime, I see that we no longer match the cash with the 50 cents on the dollar like we used to. This will occur for a period of time. This isn't a forever kind of thing, but it takes pressure off of the World Fund so that we can try to get our World Fund spread out as much as humanly possible. There will be a minimum for a global grant of 30,000 and a maximum of 400,000. That will continue. And we also agreed to assist the staff. Apparently they've had some issues with applications going back and forth. You know, when they ask the volunteers, we blame the staff. You ask the staff, they say, well, the application wasn't complete or whatever. I don't want to get into the reasoning, but some of them take back and forth. And they're asking us to help them enforce if the application isn't full and complete and approved in 6 months, then it gets canceled and it's no longer in the lineup. So that's been a rule, but apparently they've been pretty soft with the rule. But we are concerned that while we ran out of the World Fund early June, we think maybe by the spring of next year we'll run out of the World Fund because we're getting so much. We had something like a 36% uptick in requests for global grants with all the things that need to be done around the world, and clubs and districts are doing a fantastic job of making sure they're doing something in their communities to help with COVID-19, and that's admirable, but it puts a lot of pressure on the World Fund, as you know. So we're monitoring it very closely. We did agree to continue with the grant of scale, which is up to $2 million over 3 years. We're going to look at it for this year, but it's going to have to be a very special project for us to approve that. But it's there, and it could be used if somebody has a really big project. And keep in mind that we don't spend the whole $2 million in 1 year. So it's the cash flow wise, it really isn't all going to affect us this year. So we'll still be able to do the kind of grants we normally do as well. It really should take over 3 years, but we're going to almost insist on 2 years so we can at least do $1 million each year. And that'll help take some of the pressure off. So a lot of talk on how to do that. We've gone back and forth, and really want to help the districts and the clubs to get the grants they want and keep the business of the foundation going and show the world that we are the foundation to make a difference. And I think that will continue to happen. Another big area for discussion and decision was Rotaract. I think some of you may remember me commenting occasionally on Rotaract over the last couple of years. And one thing I'll add to what Peter was saying about the environment, the task force looking at the environment to develop the details is going to be made up of 4 Rotarians and 4 Rotaractors. Okay, that's the level we want to remind everybody, include Rotaract in your leadership positions. So they have a seat at the table in whatever we're doing and developing. And that I think is fantastic. But the foundation, the Elevate Rotaract Committee made a report to the board of directors last October and asked for many changes to our rules and regulations regarding Rotaract. And the board has made a lot of those decisions in October. They referred the ones relating to the trustees, and it kept getting deferred up until our last meeting, where we did make some decisions on it. First of all, keep in mind, we had already agreed that Rotaractors are eligible as of July 1st, 2022, to be an international sponsor or a host sponsor of a global grant. So Rotaract clubs will be able to do it. But keep in mind, they have to be qualified to do that. So my conversations with Rotaract clubs is, you need to be just like a Rotary club, just as qualified, just as quality, and be able to handle these. So you need to be at the district's grant seminar in order to get qualified to get these global grants. We voted to have them eligible to receive the Citation for Meritorious Service and the Distinguished Service Award. But the reality is they haven't been that involved, so it's going to be a while before anybody has the resume that really makes them able to receive those. But once they start doing it, then hopefully they'll really get into doing the same thing that Rotary clubs do, because that is the idea. At this meeting, the trustees asked to remind all the RRFCs and the DRFCs to please engage Rotaract in all your training, in all your fundraising and fundraising training, and all support for the Rotary Foundation. So they should be involved just like Rotarians are involved. Remember, the council last year, Rotaract Club is a member of Rotary International, just like a Rotary Club. So everything we do, we need to remind ourselves to include them. We also asked Rotaract clubs to appoint leaders of their clubs to support the Rotary Foundation. And now the trustees, part of my message to Rotaract clubs is, guys, you need to think about E-Ray, every Rotaractor every year. Okay, this isn't just about every Rotarian every year, it's about every Rotaractor every year. So while we want you to get grants, we also want you to show that you support the Rotary Foundation. Now, they're not all going to be able to do the same level of support that Rotary clubs do. They're young in their careers, they're in university or whatever, but they can do some support. So we want them to start thinking about how they're going to do that. We also want Rotary to include Rotaract in all the foundation activities. So that's again, being inclusive of them. We're asking the Rotaract committee to appoint a Rotaractor to liaise with the trustees. So the Rotary International Rotaract Committee also has that liaison. And we asked the trustees and they agreed to also provide a liaison from the trustees to the Rotaract Committee. Again, so it's that conversation to make sure that we understand the perception and the feelings of Rotaractors as we deliberate the business of the foundation. So pretty much a lot of things have changed in Rotaract now. The major item that's left is changing our database. And there's a lot of talk on how to do that and how much money that's going to cost. And if we could develop an app, which I know they are thinking about and working on, that might resolve all of our situation, make life a lot easier. But that's still in the future. So a lot of things going on, a lot of discussions. The trustees have agreed that we will, in the past, we would meet quarterly in person. This year, we're going to meet monthly online. So it'll be virtual, but it'll be monthly. We believe we're going to get a lot more done. We're going to be more efficient. And guess what? We're going to save a lot of money. And those funds, maybe we can get them into the World Fund somehow. So we actually could do more work than we could before to help clubs and districts around the world. So, you know, we got to keep looking at the opportunities that this all gives us. And the trustees greatly appreciate the board approving those 107 applications that we ran out of money out of the disaster fund, and we wanted to continue to support the COVID-19 projects. So that was a big boost for us. So I thank our directors for their support on getting that done. So I'll stop there, and I thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Barry. The three of us, Director Peter, Trustee Barry, and I, took the time this afternoon to share with you highlights from our respective board meetings that we think impact or will impact the kind of work you're doing in your districts and in your clubs. If you have any questions for any of us, if you'd like to simply unmute yourself and ask, you can do that. Or if you want to put it in the chat function area, we'll take a look at that. I want to let you know that our next all call will likely be sometime in early November. As we have a meeting in September and one in late October, I would expect that our next all call will be in early November, and it will be on a Thursday, because doing our doodle polls, we found out that Wednesdays at 5 or Thursdays at 5 tend to be the best time for most people. So given that, you might see something come out from Peter and I and Barry for Thursday, November 5th or Thursday, November 12th. So stay tuned. Do we have any questions before we sign off? Okay, having seen none, Peter, do you have any final words?
No final words. This is a great opportunity to get information from the boards, and I'm delighted that we had so many on the call. Please feel free to reach out to Barry, Stephanie, and I at any time. We're here. We are available 24/7, and we love Zoom calls.
Barry, any final words?
Just a reminder that we need to remember to look around the rooms that we get into and see who we don't see and pick up the phone and call them. Some people are getting left behind for one reason or another. Maybe they're sick. Let's just call them and ask them how they're doing and see if we can help them to join us, because we don't want any of people to get lost in the cracks because of the change of the way we do business. Really important to keep everybody engaged. So just ask for your help with that.
Great point, Barry. If any of you have listened to President Holger speak, you know that he often will talk about caring for our Rotarians. So you're right on target, Barry. So having said that, I'm going to go ahead and then close the meeting. I appreciate all of you for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you again on another Zoom call somewhere, someplace. Everybody have a great evening. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.